Joy to the world, the Lord is come. Let earth receive her King. Let every heart prepare him room. And heaven and nature sing, and heaven and nature sing, and heaven and nature sing. Joy to the world, the Savior reigns. Let all the storms implode, while fields and floods, rocks, hills and plains repeat the sounding joy, repeat the sounding joy, repeat the sounding joy. He rules the world with truth and grace, and makes the nations prove the glories of his righteousness, and wonders of his love, 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 and wonders of his love. What child is this who laid to rest on Mary's lap is sleeping, whom angels great with anthem sweet, while shepherds watch are keeping. This is Christ the King, whom shepherds guard and angels sing. Haste, haste to bring him, Lord, the babe, the Son of Mary. So bring him incense, gold, and myrrh. Come, blessed King, to hold him. The King of kings, salvation brings. Let loving hearts enthrone him. This is Christ the King, whom shepherds guard and angels sing. Haste, haste to bring him, Lord, the babe, the Son of Mary. Raise a song on high. The Virgin sings her love high. Joy, joy, for Christ is born, the babe, the Son of Mary. This is Christ the King, whom shepherds guard and angels sing. Haste, haste to bring him, Lord, the babe, the Son of Mary. This is Christ the King, whom shepherds guard and angels sing. Haste, haste to bring him, Lord, the babe, the Son of Mary.
Merry Florida Christmas. Yeah, in Florida we do things a bit different, don't we? In the last few weeks we've talked about how Florida Christmas might be different, might not fit our typical understandings, especially for those from the Midwest or up north. or who look to traditions from Northern Europe. But in some ways, the metaphors of beaches on the sand and the promised blessing to the nations, how we light it up in Florida, and how palm trees and promises make more sense, and how the sea, the ocean, is a metaphor for how God's knowledge will cover the entire earth, that it makes more sense to have a Florida Christmas than maybe some of the traditional things like mistletoe and holly and pine trees in the middle of your living room. The sea and not ice, sand and not snow, is much more in line with Christmas biblically. And even the palm trees fit more than these pine trees or Yule tog or mistletoe. Today we're going to talk about how we have a hot Christmas, and that heat is also something that comes up in the prophecies, especially in Isaiah. We read from Isaiah chapter 4 today. In that day the branch of the Lord will be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the land shall be the pride and honor of the survivors of Israel. And he who is left in Zion and remains in Jerusalem will be called holy, everyone who has been recorded for life in Jerusalem. When the Lord shall have washed away the filth of the daughters of Zion and cleansed the bloodstains of Jerusalem from its midst by a spirit of judgment and by a spirit of burning. Then the Lord will create over the whole site of Mount Zion and over her assemblies a cloud by day and smoke and a shining of a flaming fire by night. For over all the glory there will be a canopy. There will be a booth for shade by day from the heat and for refuge and shelter from the storm and rain. Florida weather can be brutal. I cannot imagine living in this state before there was air conditioning, can you? Yeah, that's pretty tough times. And boy, all it takes is one day without air conditioning and we are complaining. I think we fear our AC units going out more than a tropical storm. People up north, they don't understand. They don't get what heat is. Do you know what I mean? I've gone up a number of times on vacations in the summer and people are going, oh, it's so hot today. And it's a whole 82 degrees with like 30% humidity. That's January for us. One place I think that does understand the problem of heat is the Middle East. And in ancient Israel, heat was serious. Seriously, they had to stay out of the heat of the day. In fact, when you were traveling throughout Israel during the times of Jesus and before, you would do it at night. Oh yeah, you take the dangers that came with the night to avoid the heat of the day. And so here, as we're studying a Florida Christmas, we are looking at Isaiah and how heat was an issue then and heat is an issue now. And how this oracle of hope filled with the metaphors of the Garden of Eden and the Sinai wilderness wanderings, and how God would protect his people and how God would come to them and shelter them as a pillar of cloud and fire and tabernacle with them. And they would not be any time again smitten with the heat of day, but we'd be protected from the ravages of nature caused by the curse of the fall. We are going to see how great Christmas truly is, and what God's true intent with it all through a hot Christmas time. But I'll tell you this, it's a shock. It truly is a shock that Isaiah chapter 4 verses 2 through 6, as we just read, it comes out of nowhere, it feels like, especially since it's sandwiched in between in the book of Isaiah, in the opening chapters, and now at chapter 5, two different oracles of doom. That is, Israel had been faithless, Israel had gone after the other nations, Israel was like everyone else. Israel had become violent and unjust, and filled up with themselves. They had raised up even the Astarte pole of Baal worship in the midst of Jerusalem itself. Jerusalem, instead of being in Eden where God was dwelling with his people, we're at the temple with images of pomegranates and trees and flourishing in God's presence as in the Garden of Eden. All of a sudden, God has abandoned this place and he has condemned it and said it will turn into a pile of rubble. It'll go back into a haunt for jackals, a wilderness where it's uninhabitable because of the idolatry and faithlessness of God's people. There will be no more Eden. There will be no more joy. And God's people, no more. So when you look through the whole book of Isaiah, and you notice all this talk about nature and creation, the beauty and the glory and the desert and the desolation, what you notice is it's not just a straightforward shot. This future hope does not come simply as a progression over time because human beings have learned their lessons and grown closer to God and over time have made strides in their faithfulness and faith, but rather it comes through judgment and then restoration. Through the old being gone and the new arriving as a new creation. It would come through wilderness and then a restoration of Eden. Through death, then resurrection. And that's kind of the cycle through all the 66 chapters of the book of Isaiah. A cycle of judgment and grace, death and resurrection, the end and a new beginning. You see, God intended this world. He wanted this world from the beginning to be a place where he would be at home within creation, but more important, that human beings would be at home in his beautiful creation, and that they would tend the garden with him and image him, represent him to all of creation, and care for it as great stewards of the wonderful diversity and beauty and glory that he had created on this earth and in this world and in this whole universe, and that we would be faithful partners with him in the covenant of grace. But the story goes that we thought we knew better. We chose, with Adam and Eve, to take of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, of taking it on ourselves and trying to become our own gods. We could build our own ways like the Tower of Babel. We could end up being in charge and being on top. We believed the serpent's lies, and we ended up destroying our own sense of home, our own relationships, our own livelihoods. Wilderness, heat, heartache, isolation. The prophet Ezekiel captures it best. In his book, the prophet has a vision of Death Valley, a valley of dry bones laid out, and God asks, can these bones live? And Ezekiel says, only you know, God, because this is where we end up when we took charge. We destroyed your beautiful creation. We destroyed our relationship with you. We made a mess of everything, and we end up dead with no hope in ourselves. And that is precisely when human hope ends and God's hope and his promises begin. Thank God, his promises are not contingent on how well we keep them. They're only contingent on the faithfulness and goodness of our God and his character. God will create out of the rubble of this Jerusalem that was laid waste a whole new creation, a city, a garden city flowing with water and protected from the heat of the sun, and God's presence, his cloud of glory and his beauty would be there night and day. But how? How's God going to do this? You know, there's one huge paradox and predicament throughout the scriptures. God has been, since Adam and Eve, looking for a faithful covenant partner. He has tried to find someone who will, who can keep the covenant, keep the relationship, respond in faith to his promises. And each time he looks to a human being, we fail. With Adam and Eve, they ate the forbidden fruit and were cast outside of the garden. For the next generation, Cain, he kills Abel. He murders his own brother. And the story goes on in the book of Genesis and throughout the Pentateuch and throughout the entire history of Israel. Righteous Noah becomes unrighteous and gets drunk after the flood. Abraham is both one who is considered righteous because he believed God and trusted in him, and yet gives away his wife a couple of times because of fear. Moses himself, the great prophet through whom the covenant was brought to Israel at Mount Sinai, ends up dying in the wilderness and not entering the promised land because of his unfaithfulness. So how in the world can God bring about the partnership that he is looking for between humanity and himself, where we come alongside of him to reign in this creation, to image him to this creation, to care for it as God cares for it? Where is he going to find that partner, and how will he accomplish it? Isaiah 4 says it all starts with a little branch. Isaiah writes, in that day, that future day, the branch of the Lord shall be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the land shall be the pride and honor of the survivors of Israel. One old German Christmas carol is sung, probably not your favorite, but it's one of my favorites. It's "Behold, a branch is growing, of loveliest form and grace." And it talks about how Jesus is this branch, this one who will bring about the restoration of the dynasty of David, that it got chopped down and destroyed because of unfaithful kings. The branch of the Lord. It's Isaiah's term for the coming Messiah, the one from David's line who will be unlike David and able to fulfill everything God intends for this one to fulfill. Isaiah says in Isaiah 11:1, there shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit. One from David's lineage. God keeps his promise that there will always be a king on the throne of David, as he had told David in 2 Samuel 7. Even though David didn't keep the covenant, and nor did his sons, Solomon, nor any of the others after him, God will keep his side of the bargain. Well, it's not really a bargain, it's a promise from God. And God will bring about someone who will be a faithful covenant partner. But by the time of prophet Isaiah, and then the exile, and after the exile from Babylon, when they do come back to Jerusalem, there are no more kings. The priesthood really is no more. And the prophets, there are a few, but they slowly become silent. Prophet, priest, and king are gone from God's people, and there is a time of waiting, a time of anticipating what is God's next move. That's kind of how the Old Testament ends. What will God's next move be? Jeremiah speaks of the same branch and puts a twist on it to explain a little more how God will bring about the fulfillment. Jeremiah writes in Jeremiah 23, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will raise up for David a righteous branch, and he shall reign as king and deal wisely, and shall execute justice and righteousness in the land. In his days Judah will be saved, and Israel will dwell securely, and this is the name by which he will be called. The Lord is our righteousness. So his own name says who he is. The Lord is our righteousness. God solves the paradox of how can he find a human who will be faithful by having his own son, fully God, become human to be the faithful one for us. Jesus becomes our faithful covenant partner, God's faithful covenant partner, fully human and fully divine. The branch. Not a towering cedar tree. When Jesus was born, he didn't look stately. There was nothing about him that we'd say, oh my goodness, he must be royal. He wasn't born in a palace. but in a manger, to the poorest of the poor. And he became a refugee within months of his birth as Herod tried to kill him. But from this humble little sapling, God would do the most astounding things. Isaiah goes on in his prophecy. In chapter 53, he describes a little more what this little branch, this tender shoot, will do. Who has believed what he has heard from us, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a young plant, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows, and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. That's the paradox, isn't it? The paradox of the Passion. That God would find a faithful partner in his Son, Jesus Christ, fully human, taking our place, living out Adam's temptations in the wilderness and overcoming every one of them, coming into the promised land and being as stately as a king, but being a servant king, better than David, speaking the word of God and prophetically speaking about God's instruction and law like Moses, but even greater than Moses, greater than David, greater than Noah, greater than Esther, greater than every, quote, hero in the Bible who was also not so heroic, and showing how to fulfill all the things that have been done poorly over time by human beings. He takes our place. He is the priest that we've been always looking for, that bridge between God and humanity, who intercedes for us, who sacrifices himself for us. He is the prophet who speaks truthfully of God and his grace and promises and lives by the words he speaks, and he is the king. The one who can rule, the one who can establish the kingdom and bring us into it. In the last days, Isaiah says in our text about chapter 4, verses 2 through 6, God will wash away the filth and cleanse all the bloodstains from his people. Because Jesus is the one who took that filth and poured out his blood to cleanse us. God will then again create a garden city, a new Jerusalem, lush and pleasant, and provide a shelter from excessive heat. Revelation, kind of the capstone of the entire Bible, sums up all of these metaphors and brings it to a dynamic and beautiful conclusion. When John writes this, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be any mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away.' And he who was seated on the throne said, 'Behold, I am making all things new.' And he said, 'Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true.'" So yes, I'm dreaming of a warm Christmas, a hot one, a Florida Christmas. And what that reminds me of is that there will be one day when the heat will not be a problem, where God will protect us, where God will cover us, where God will dwell with us in a new Eden, in a new city, in a new future. That's always been God's intent, to be Emmanuel, as we so often say at this time of the year, God with us, God for us, God and we, one together as faithful covenant partners. That God brings about what we could never accomplish. That's called his grace and good news. The original Christmas, the intent of Christmas, has more to do with Florida than Canada, I would say. Sorry, Canada. Biblical prophecy has much more to say than about winter wonderlands or Frosty the Snowman or holly or mistletoe. And you know, any of your traditions, any of your songs, any of your carols, anything that you love about Christmas that may deal with the things that might not have been at the first, they're fine. They're great as long as they don't obscure the true meaning of Christmas and you lose sight of the amazing gift that Jesus is for you. One of my other favorite carols is O Little Town of Bethlehem. Oh, doesn't matter which melody you go with, there's probably 3 or 4 of them. But the words of the last stanza just stand out to me. They are what our prayer is and what God's intent is for us right now, to be at home with us and we with Him, and what He's going to bring about someday. The carol says, O holy child of Bethlehem, descend to us, we pray. Cast out our sin and enter in. Be born in us today. We hear the Christmas angels the great glad tidings tell. O come to us. Abide with us. Our Lord Emmanuel. Happy Florida Christmas.